do that has value in the marketplace. So if you chose not to do this exercise and you're a student, and the reason is because you don't know, I think that makes perfect sense. It's a really important question. You'll see by the time I get through learn, earn, assistance, and persistence, it's actually not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's actually a virtuous circle. It's a constant feedback loop, all geared towards answering this question. What is it that you're especially good at that makes you money? If you didn't do it because you know the answer already, let's see where you stand, and we'll sort of check yourself. When we asked our survey respondents this question, of the middle class, 55% said yes. I know what I'm exceptionally good at that makes money. That means that 45%, almost half of the people we talk to, don't have connectivity. They're not in touch with what it takes, what they're exceptionally good at that makes them money. It is very hard to make a lot of money if you don't know what you're good at that makes you money. Okay? That is a big, big question. You can see as levels of wealth go up, their connection to this question also goes up. People who make a lot of money or have a lot of money know what they do, what skill they have or talents they have that they can practice to make the money. For those who did say yes to this question, how many skills did they answer when we did the same exercise over the phone that I just did with you? Interestingly, the middle class, those with the least net worth, seem to think they're good at the most things. And as you go up in wealth, the number of skills goes down. So again, start with, I didn't answer the question because I don't know. That's an honest answer, and of course that means sort of the most possible things that you're good at. And wealth goes up as you not only know this question, but you know it even better and better about yourself. And I'm going to show you over the course of this conversation how you get that list down. So if you wrote down 6 things, or 10 things, how do you narrow it down? Because ultimately, what we find out is that people who are incredibly successful just do a couple of things over and over again that they're really good at. Whereas everyone else is trying to do a lot of things that they're only so-so at. It also tells us that the middle class have an inflated sense of themselves. You'll see that over and over again, that they have a misunderstanding of how wealth is created, and one of the examples is they don't even understand what they know how to do that actually creates wealth. And the reverse of this question is important too. Okay, so you made a really long list of things that you think you're pretty good at. Let's just say that's where you started tonight. Or that you're okay at, or let's say you're studying some profession, or you're in a profession that requires you to be good at a bunch of things. Like, are you a team player? Can you make a presentation? Can you do research? Whatever it is, these sort of broad-based ideas, these things that you get evaluated at. What happens when we ask our survey respondents, well, what do you do to get better at the tasks you're only so-so at? And what do you think the answers would be? Again, middle class got it all wrong. The middle class seems to think that not only are they good at 6 things that make them a lot of money, but that they work really hard at all the other things that they're not so good at. Whereas as you go up levels of wealth, they spend less time trying to be good at the things they're not good at, all the way down to 0. Our wealthiest survey respondents spend no time trying to get better at things that they're not good at. And they spend all their time trying to do just a couple of things. Can anyone give me a word that describes that phenomenon?
Focus.
Focus. Isn't it funny that a simple word can actually describe what it takes to create wealth? At least one part of this conversation tonight. Focus. Now, for those of you who are in the working world, and you have your annual or semi-annual performance review, and you go into your HR or you go to see your supervisor, and they say, Joe, you're really good at this, but you seem to be not so good at that. Let's work on that. Just know that that's a middle-class mentality. That is not a wealth-creating mentality. That's basically someone you work with who is telling you to be, ready for 2 really bad words? Cover your ears if you have fragile systems. Well-rounded. Well-rounded means I'm only mediocre at a bunch of things. Okay? The wealthy double down on what they're good at. They do only a couple things, they do a lot of it, and that's all they try to do. Now let's go to our students in the room. And for instructors in the room, I apologize for what I'm about to say. When you get a C in one grade and an A in another grade, I don't know, I'll just say like a C in history and an A in math, a common response would be, well, you got to get a tutor in history, you're not doing so well. Well, the wealthy would say, screw history, let's just focus on math. In fact, why don't I get a tutor in math? So I can be really good at math, because that's what I'm really good at. They bet on themselves, and they focus. Okay? So as you are starting out your life, and really, for the students in the room, you're at the bottom of this journey, where you don't know a lot about yourselves, and you don't know what you're really good at, and anyone who's been in the working world a while knows that, this is the pyramid of our lives. This is the filtering, the winnowing down. You figure out what you're good at, and you try to do as much of it as possible. But the world keeps telling us to be well-rounded, to be utility players. They're taking us farther and farther away from the thing that creates wealth. And one of the things that successful people do is they ignore that. They ignore that message. It's funny, so when you want to take the leap, L-E-A-P, when you take the leap here, here's what I mean when I'm talking about learn. You must focus on what you do best. And now, just make sure that students in the room, I never know what everyone's work experience is. You guys know what putting out fires means as a phrase? So putting out fires is all those things you do that you have to do all day long that don't actually add any value to anything. Anyone here who's working knows exactly what they do, all day long that has nothing to do with work. I was once in a group like this, and as I was telling the story, some guy, a very successful entrepreneur of a multi-million-dollar company, said he had spent 2 days because one of his guys wanted the new iPhone 5. And he had to work through the whole system to tell this guy how he has to wait until he gets the iPhone 5 like everybody else. That's putting out fires. It's a massive waste of his time. The funny thing is that as we survey very, very wealthy people, at all levels of wealth, they're always fighting against putting out fires. You would think if you were a billionaire, you could hire someone to help you put out your fires in your life. It's not true. At every level of wealth, we have to put out fires. So one of the ways that you can be very successful is find a way to make that as little of your life as possible. Some of us will spend 100% of our day putting out fires, some 90%. If you're really in business in a substantial way, it's at least 50%. But the difference between those numbers is really important. Spend as little time as possible doing things that don't add value, and spend as much time as possible focusing on what you do best. And in order to do that, you're going to have to learn what you do best first. Okay, that's the letter L. Let's look at the letter E, which I call maximize your opportunity. This is really about, putting yourself in the line of money, making sure that if money is being made, it's coming to you. And so the question, pretty simple question we asked our survey respondents is, how do you make a living? Or how do you create wealth? We got pretty predictable answers. Source of wealth. Well, for our middle class, the obvious answer would be that they have a job. That's how they make their wealth. And look at the middle class millionaire. We see 17% having a job, and then jobs almost disappear. Okay, 3% and 1%. We're actually sort of in the land here of one of the few places that you can actually create wealth by having a job. This person who's called the highly compensated corporate executive, they actually do live in Connecticut, but there's not too many of them in the world, in the country rather. In other words, you can't really create wealth by having a job. This second line is kind of interesting, private practice. That's your doctors, your lawyers, your CPAs, your architects. And those are great professions, but keep in mind that when you're a doctor, when you're a lawyer, let's just say, and let's just say you make a lot of money. Let's say you make $250,000 a year as a lawyer. This is a lot of money. Now you want to go on vacation for a week. You don't make any money when you're on vacation. And so what people learn when they're in private practice, and you see 18% of our middle class millionaires are, they learn that actually they have a job. They actually make a living by selling their time. And selling your time is a lousy way to make a living if you want to create wealth. Again, see that private practice all but disappears. And then here's a big and interesting jump when we get to something called business equity, owning a piece of the business, owning equity in the business, okay, or real estate or anything. Middle class don't have, they don't own a lot of businesses. Middle class millionaires, people who have $1 to $10 million. In other words, people who have accumulated quite a bit of wealth, but they're not even quite millionaires, given, in that earlier definition I provided you. They understand that owning a business is the way to wealth. And then, of course, our very wealthy respondents understand completely and deeply that owning a business is the way you create wealth. And so out of this kind of pretty straightforward presentation of data comes what we call the line of money. The line of money is this. The lowest rung on the line of money is something I call player pricing. That's when you sell your time by the hour. And I don't care if you're Derek Jeter, who sells his time by the hour, or you're just a regular guy making a living who's selling his time by the hour. And by the hour, I mean hour, day, week, month, year, salary, whatever you call it. It's very hard to create wealth in that role. Project pricing is something a little different. Project pricing is, let's say someone gives you $100 to do a job, and you can find other people to do it for you, and you pay them $80, you get to keep $20. And now you've made money running a project, but you didn't have to actually do the work. You had to sell it maybe, you had to manage it, but you didn't have to do the work. That's project pricing. A lot of businesses are based on that model. Percentage pricing is also a common model. It's for if you get into an arrangement with somebody where you get, let's say, 1% of all the money they make. That's another popular model. But the biggest place to be is the top, proprietor pricing, when you're the proprietor. So when you run a company and own a company where 10 or 50 or 100 people work for you, and all the success that they create and all the wealth that they create actually accumulates up to you as the owner. Okay, whether it's a combination of percentage or project pricing or something else, it accumulates to you as the owner. And that's why owners hire workers. And workers get paid a fixed amount, and they do work, and then the owner gets to keep what's left over. Now there's a lot of risk involved in being the owner, and you can have years where you lose money too. But wealth is created in America by being the owner, not the worker. Straightforward? So this is an easy one. If you want to take the leap, you have to be an owner, not a player. Okay? Be George Steinbrenner, not Derek Jeter. Actually, I don't follow baseball at all, so I don't even know who is the hot new Derek Jeter now. I don't think it's Derek Jeter anymore, is it?
It's not Steinbrenner, he's dead.
And Steinbrenner's dead, yeah. But, you know, be an owner, not a player. And scalable business models. A lot of people get caught up in the idea of running something called a private practice. They want to be a successful lawyer, doctor, CPA. And they'll discover a little too late that that's a really hard way to make a living because there's nothing scalable about it. You can only really make money as much as you can work yourself personally, and there's going to be a few other people in your life. Anyone here a professional or a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts to share about the profession you've chosen?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's all time and it's all service business. I only got so many hours a day to sell, so I gotta it's a terrible product to have to sell. You can't scale it at all. It's very difficult.
It's one of the, I appreciate the candor. It's one of the areas where our parents, I mean, I'm sure your parents couldn't have been prouder when you became a lawyer. But our parents don't always give us good advice. Earlier when I said you come home with a C in history and an A in math and your parents tell you get a tutor for history, it's not good advice. When our parents told us to become professionals, it wasn't really good advice. It secured our place in a middle-class lifestyle, probably,
Sure.
but that's it.
It works that way, but if you want to go beyond that, it really is not the way to go. You really do have to be in a business. I've seen that many times.
Yeah. Letter A. I appreciate that, thank you. Assistance, develop your network. So I started out with a letter L, learn what you're really, really good at. It's a very hard exercise, probably take you your whole life to figure out. E, earn, make sure that when you are, whatever you're doing, you try to move up the line of money to as close to proprietor as you can get. Maybe you're in a company right now where you can at least maybe define a project you can work on, or argue for a percentage, which of course is the province of salespeople, which is why they tend to make a little more money. They have percentage-based business models. And now we end up with letter A, assistance, develop your network. And the question we asked our survey respondents is really interesting. It's not really not a question here, but you would think that when you're talking about networks, you would think that really successful people know lots of people. But it's not true. They tend not to know lots of people any more than anyone else. You would think that when you survey really successful people about their networks, they'd say, I know the right people, powerful people, let's say. It tends not to be true. This is the question where we saw an actual break in the data. This was an actual revelation for us. The question was, is it essential to know people who know people? That's a really interesting phrase. And what I mean by that is, it's called nodal networking. What I mean is, Let's say you know 5 people. And by know, I'm going to describe that. I mean have intimacy. I mean like, you know, you can call them, you can ask them for favors. They will help you, you will help them. And they know 5 people, and they know 5 people. That becomes a network of about 125 people very, very quickly. The problem with the world we're living at the moment, the sort of social media network world, is that you might rack up 500 or 5,000 friends. But when you ask any of them to help you, or you ask any of them to share information with you, they don't really have any skin in your game. They don't really care about your success. What I'm talking about here is building a network of a small number of people who will do things for you when you ask them, will think about you when they go through their business day, and you'll think about them. And I have to say, this makes me sound like a cranky old man a bit, but the sort of social media-oriented world, they're forgetting about having a small number of people where you got each other's back. And it's kind of going away. So I caution those of you, if you want to differentiate yourself and head down the path of wealth, and we see frequently these innovations that come out, like social media, and they feel like they're opening up the world to a lot of people, but there's another dark side to it, which is that they're creating a lot of best practice, or a lot of practices that are not best practices. A lot of networking without a purpose. Just knowing people and being involved with people, but not actually helping people. And so what we see is that the very wealthy still seem to understand this notion of nodal networks, of small groups of people who know each other. Now, when we ask a lot of people about the topic of luck, a lot of people will tell us that wealthy people experience luck. And it's true. Luck is actually an important factor in creating wealth. We had this conversation a little while ago. You know, you can do a lot of things right. It doesn't mean that it's going to break your way. And so luck turns out to be an important factor in wealth creation. But luck is really a function of your network. Because I would ask any one of you to think about a time you were lucky that didn't somehow involve somebody sharing some information with you. Something coming your way from somebody else that allowed it to happen. And so luck is really a word that stems entirely from the potency of our networks. And so I'm going to use a fancy word to describe luck, which is called transitivity. And transitivity is a word that means how many people in your network already know each other. And if you have a transitivity score of your network of, let's say, 50 or less, it means that you have a group of people in your life who don't know each other. So you're the focal point, and that's a good thing. And then higher transitivity score means that they do know each other already, meaning you're not the focal point. They already have connectivity to each other, and that's a bad thing. And let me tell you what I mean by this. Let's say you have a network of people who need each other, but they already know each other. So if anyone who's in business goes to their industry association events, okay, you're a trucker, and you go to the trucking association event. Well, you need each other for all sorts of things, lots of business. But everybody knows each other through those industry events, and so it's very hard for you to identify any unique value you have in a group of people who need each other but also know each other. Now take a group of strangers who don't know each other, but they also don't need each other. So if you've been in a bus station or an airport lately, it's a lot of people. They don't know each other, but they don't need each other. So it's very hard to create value in an airport for yourself. There's very little focal point opportunity for you to find a network that means anything. Don't need each other, but know each other. I call these my high school friends. Because basically these are the people you grow up with and you love them, but you don't really need each other anymore. There's not anything to do with each other. You just love them for who they are. For those of you in college, you're probably making these friends right now. You don't need each other, but you know each other. Hopefully you'll love each other. There's only one part of this quadrant that has value. Needing each other, but not knowing each other. That's a definition of luck. And luck is a function of your network. So let me give you an explicit example of somebody we all know and revere. I already mentioned his name earlier, Steve Jobs. Okay, Steve Jobs was he was not an artist and he was not an engineer. But he understood that artists needed tools to express themselves. Musicians and writers and filmmakers, they needed tools to express themselves. And if they had those tools, they could express themselves even more. But he knew engineers, because he grew up in that world, Silicon Valley, and he knew how to speak to engineers. And he knew engineers could make those tools. So Steve Jobs found himself at the nexus of a network of people who needed each other but didn't know each other. Artists don't talk to engineers. Engineers don't talk to artists. They're two different kinds of people. Arguably, Steve Jobs created his wealth by putting himself at the nexus of two groups that needed each other but didn't know each other. I can give you a lot of examples. I had the great pleasure of interviewing a guy named Russell Simmons the other day. He's a clothing guy, he's a record producer, and he made his fortune when he created a company a clothing company that served a category that was called urban youth. And then there came a moment when the Macy's of the world, really the big textile apparel companies, realized that there was a lot of kids who wanted to dress like urban youth. And they had to buy Russell Simmons' company and companies like his and pay him gobs and gobs of money because he understood what they wanted and he understood how to translate that quality to what the rest of the youth clothing market wanted. Groups of people who need each other but don't know each other. This takes a lot of thinking, but it really comes back to your network. Does your network already know each other? It doesn't matter if they need each other if they already know each other. Can you find a place that uses your skill set, when we talked about at the beginning, discover what's at your center, can you find a place where you can use that skill set at the nexus of networks that need each other but don't already know each other? That is a place that wealth is created. Now let me go back and take you through Steve Jobs, through what we've already done, learn, earn, and assistance. Steve Jobs was not a conventional CEO. I mean, he didn't care about Wall Street or making conference calls or selling his stuff on the road. Steve Jobs was a product designer. Okay, he just had an understanding of what artists wanted and what his customer wanted, and he spent all his time with engineers figuring out how to make it. So he just did all day long the one thing he was really good at, and that's all he did. He didn't do all the other things that conventional CEOs are supposed to do. Now, earn. Of course, he started a company, Apple. He took it public. That's the essence of being a proprietor. But actually, when he went back to Apple for his second tour of duty, after he was kicked out and came back, he didn't even take a salary. He took $1 salary. He was paid entirely in stock or stock options. In other words, he didn't want to spend 1 minute being a player. He wanted to be paid as an owner. And, as I said, he made his success by putting himself at the intersection of networks that needed each other but didn't know each other. And the result of those three things together, is the biggest company in the world, Apple. Okay? You can think about this for yourselves in your own life. What's your version of those three things? Doing what you're best at, making sure you're an owner in whatever it is you're best at, and finding the intersection of the place where they need each other but don't know each other, and you can put yourself in the middle. You can create vast wealth by putting those three things together. But you can also do all three of those things and it still doesn't work, which is a reality of life. So let's get there. But before we do, I forgot about this slide. So this is also not a very friendly slide to education. Factors that are important to creating wealth. A good education or luck? Middle class wants to be good at something, a technical skill. They want to be a doctor or a lawyer. They want to be an engineer. They want to be really good at a software program. They want to be good at marketing, right? They want to be knowledgeable about something. Really successful people want to be lucky. And when they say that, what they mean is they want to find the intersection of people who need each other but don't know each other. That's the essence of luck. They want to thoughtfully cultivate productive networks that help them do things. I get the chance to speak to a lot of young people, and a lot of them say, what can I do, what can I do, what can I do? Well, start spending time with people who are more successful than you. Pretty simple and very powerful. It's called social contagion. If you spend time with people who smoke cigarettes, it's very hard to quit smoking. And if you spend time with people who go to the gym a lot, it's a lot easier to go to the gym. And if you spend time with people who are serious about their lives, especially about their business lives, it's easier for you to do that too. And anyone who plays a sport knows that if you can get in a game with people who are just a little bit better than you, you're going to raise your game. So the hardest thing to do, well, it's actually not that hard, but I'll tell you what's hard, is to put together networks of people in your life that are doing something like what you want to be doing and are good at it, and raise your game. And I'll tell you something else. This is another area where the middle class got it all wrong. Because the middle class tend to be uncomfortable when they're around people who are doing better than they are. There's a lot of evidence in social network research that the middle class are uncomfortable being around, let's say, really successful, wealthy people. It makes them uncomfortable. It challenges their self-esteem. It challenges the decisions they've made in life. Whereas very successful people always want to spend time with people who are more successful than them. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why I think that is in a moment. But luck versus technical skill. Because if you want to be successful, one way to do it is to build networks where luck can be created. And ultimately, if you're going to be a proprietor, you're going to have to hire people who are better or smarter at the thing you do than you are, right? Steve Jobs never said, I need engineers who, I have to know everything about engineering, and every engineer has to do what I tell them to do. He had to find engineers who were smarter than him. Those were people who had invested a lot of time and money in technical skills. And at the end of the day, the proprietor could just hire those people. That's where wealth is created. I think that this is different in business school, and I think it's different in entrepreneurship programs, because when we talk about technical skills, we're not really talking about entrepreneurship programs. We're talking about, as I said, being a coder, an engineer, these kinds of technical skills, where you're always worried about not having the highest, sharpest skills in the collection of, in the pool of employees. But this is how you take the leap when it comes to building a network. As I said, you could do all these things, and you could do them all right, and things can still go wrong. So this is where persistence comes in. And again, remember the beginning of this research, okay? We wanted to figure out what the middle class did or didn't understand about how wealth is created, and we discovered that they didn't seem to understand when it comes to these 4 areas: learn, earn, assistance, and persistence. I think I'm going to show you something that's something worth thinking about, because it affects all of us. It has to do with all of us approach our lives. It's this concept that failure is a learning tool. It's a concept that when you fail, you should have faith in its productive value. Not just feel bad about what just happened, but actually try to learn from failure. And so the question we asked our survey respondents was, what did you do after a significant career setback? This is the question we asked. So this shouldn't be too surprising to anybody, but in our middle class survey respondents, the most common answer after a career setback was giving up, 54%. When they failed, they did not try to do it again. 33% of our middle class survey respondents tried in a different field, and 13% tried in the same field. But look across the top, try it again in the same field. In other words, when they failed, they went back at it again. Very high numbers for the wealthy. When they failed, their most common response was to try again. Give up? Not in the vocabulary of the very wealthy. Now, if you're into sports at all, you've already gotten the coach's pep talk about, at the end of a game where you lost, you got to go back in and do it again. We've heard it all. It's a lot harder to do in real life. And a lot of people get knocked down and they never get back up. And we know this differential in our own lives. Again, your kid comes home and does badly in a test or gets a bad grade, and you say, go back, Hiller, and do it again. Come on, you can do it. But a lot of us, when we fail, it's right here. The most common response from the middle class is to give up. Now, let me just share with you nothing too surprising here across the top. Failures have taught me what I'm good at. So what I'm looking for here when we ask this question is, what's the learning functionality? What's the productive use of failure? Failures have taught me what I'm good at. The middle class don't think failure is a learning tool. 17% of them say it's a learning tool. 58, 78, 95%, as we go up in wealth, think that failure is a learning tool, okay? And what I mean here is, it's not just something that has to happen, it's something that you almost want to happen because you're going to learn from it. I've had career moves that failed. This is interesting. So basically, look at this. Everyone has failed. Okay, the people we surveyed have all experienced failure. I mean, how many of these people in this room have failed? Okay, about 83% of them, actually. So failure is common to all of us. That's not the issue. Here's the issue, and we found this in our numbers, and it took some real digging to figure this out. My associates have had failures. In other words, when we ask these people, how many people that you know have had failures too? 19% of the middle class said that their associates have had failures. 60% of the middle-class millionaire survey respondents said that they had associates who had failure, 78 and 85%. I'm about to show you something that I think strikes at the heart of why the middle class have trouble creating wealth. How can 83% of the middle class have failed, but only 19% of them report knowing somebody who failed? That's a difference of 64 percentage points. It doesn't add up. As you go up in levels of wealth, the difference between these two numbers comes down. The middle class is ashamed of failing. The middle class is ashamed of the very act that will teach them what they are best at. Going back to the letter L, learn. When the middle class fails, it's a shameful act and they don't tell anybody about it. Imagine the most powerful learning tool in your life, and if it happens to you, you experience it as shame. As you go up in levels of wealth, people who fail talk about it, share it, they even celebrate it. I met a guy the other day from Silicon Valley. His business card listed all the companies that he had been part of that had failed. That, in Silicon Valley, that means something. That means that you know what you're doing. Failure. And by the way, we're thousands of miles away from Silicon Valley, and it may be a fantasy to you to get there one day, or maybe something that you think is silly. But I'll tell you the truth. They understand failure, and they celebrate it in a way that's incredibly constructive. And I'll tell you, one of the things that's hard about, let's say, older communities, like the Northeast is an old community, the Midwest is an old community, is that their conventional thinking prevents us from getting on the other side of this, which is to fail and celebrate failure constructively. So here's the way I think of failure in the eyes of the middle class and failure in the eyes of the wealthy. For the middle class, failure is like getting punched in the mouth. Okay? It could happen to any one of us. It would be shocking as hell if it did. We wouldn't really know what happened, and we might be ashamed or afraid of what had just happened. We certainly would not go out looking to fail, to get punched in the face. For the very wealthy, failure is like going to the dentist. You don't want to go to the dentist, but you know you have to go every so often. You have to go every so often. You must go through failure every so often in order to learn. And so now we see the loop I was talking about earlier. Persistence will allow those of you who put 5 and 6 and 10 things on your list of things that you're exceptionally good at and realize, I'm not as good at that as I thought I was. Strike it off the list. Or I met somebody who's better at it than I am. Strike it off the list. And imagine ending up with a list of things that you really are better at than everybody else. And doing that all day long. And owning the company that you do that at. And building a network of people around you who help feed that enterprise. And then when the inevitable thing happens that wasn't as favorable as you hoped, celebrating it and learning from it. When you fail, try a new way, share and celebrate failure. Now I told you guys that I was going to walk through LEAP, and I was going to tell you it's relatively simple, but I will show you wealth by the numbers. And I also said that some of you are going to have trouble doing this, even though I'm laying it out here as a very simple recipe. And let me tell you why that is. And to do this, to sort of end soon, I'm going to tell you a story that has nothing to do with money or business. It has to do with life and death. So during my travels, I met a guy named Dr. Richard Shannon. Dr. Richard Shannon was the doctor at the intensive care unit of Allegheny General Hospital in Allegheny, Pennsylvania. And at the intensive care unit at Allegheny, the typical death rate from something called hospital-acquired infections was 19 deaths per year. Anyone know what a hospital-acquired infection is? It's an infection you get at the hospital. In other words, you weren't sick with that particular problem before you got there, but there's so much infection and disease and yucky stuff around hospitals that you end up getting infected by it. So 19 people a year at Allegheny died from something that they didn't have when they went in. And when Shannon came on board, they said to him, yeah, boss, we're doing pretty good. 19 deaths per year. That's pretty good in our industry, from things that they didn't have when they came in. Shannon says that's unacceptable. Now, Shannon had just been to a 3-day seminar on something that's very similar to the lean manufacturing principles or the Toyota way. Anyone ever heard of the Toyota way? Set of learning principles or lean manufacturing, very popular idea. And during the course of this 3-day seminar, the methodologies that had been formed on the floor of a Toyota factory had been translated into the healthcare industry, and they were taught how to bring lean manufacturing, the Toyota way, to the healthcare industry. And Shannon thought this was some of the best stuff he'd ever heard. And he brought it back to the hospital. And good thing he was the boss, because when he brought it back and said, from now on, the only acceptable number of deaths from hospital-acquired infections is 0. No more celebrating 19, which is about 1.5 a month. He said only 0 will be acceptable. And we are going to follow the best practices that I just learned in this 3-day seminar. No exceptions. Well, the doctors and nurses balked. They said, you can't take what auto manufacturing guys did, most of them aren't even high school graduates, on a car, and bring that over to a hospital on something as complicated as the human body in a staff of doctors, highly trained doctors and nurses. You cannot translate those. But he was the boss, and he said, we are translating them, we are doing them, no exceptions, and 0 is the only acceptable number I will accept when it comes to deaths here. Would it surprise you to know that within 60 days, they hit 0, and they basically have stayed at 0 at Allegheny General Hospital, ever since then? Would it surprise you to know that after Shannon did this, and the numbers consistently stayed 0 or close to 0 year in and year out, not a lot of other doctors came looking. They weren't that interested. You would have thought, when someone comes up with a way to do this, right, to eliminate deaths and money saved, that every other doctor would have run to Shannon and said, what did you do? That's not what happened. This is an article from the New York Times, and the headline is, Hospital Infection Problem Persists. The nagging and largely solvable problem of hospital-acquired infections remains as resistant to cure as the germs that contribute to an estimated 100,000 deaths per year, according to a government study. Do you guys know that 100,000 deaths per year means more people die from a thing they didn't even have when they went to the hospital than people die in car crashes? Dr. Carolyn Clancy, the agency's director, pointed out that projects across the country had shown remarkable success in reducing infection rates by adhering to basic standards for hand hygiene, disinfection of patients, sterile handling of equipment, and proper use of antibiotics. This is the most important sentence I'm about to read. At many hospitals, those successes have yet to overcome the entrenched medical culture. Wash your hands, clean your patients, handle equipment carefully, manage antibiotics better. Nothing here about new training in any new skills. Nothing here about fancy or expensive equipment. Just best practices faithfully followed with rigor to produce a predictable outcome. And yet, the medical community cannot, still to this day, cannot embrace it, and still to this day, 100,000 people a year die because they can't change their behavior because of an entrenched culture. I told you guys that we were surveying the gap between the middle class and what they believe it takes to create wealth, and this very small minority of other people, self-made millionaires, who seem to understand what it takes to create wealth. I told you, it's relatively simple. Learn what you do best, earn money by doing it, get assistance with everything else, and use persistence to overcome self-doubt. I did not ask you to get special training. No one here has to know how to use fancy equipment to do this. But you have to get out of your entrenched culture, the conventional wisdom, what middle-class people believe, in order to succeed. So the other day, this book I'm out in the country, all over the country. I was in Michigan yesterday, Philadelphia the day before. I'm in airports a lot. And a long time ago, I was struck by this idea, which is that, I'm on airplanes all the time. And airplanes are really crazy if you think about it. And sometimes I think about this stuff. You're in a tiny little piece of metal at 36, 38, 40,000 feet in the air, going 600 miles an hour. But I'll tell you, I get on airplanes all the time, and I don't even think about that, really. But I tell you that if I go to the doctor, or someone I care about is going to the hospital, now that I know about hospital-acquired infections, that's all I can think about. And so I ask myself, what is the difference between the two leaders of these two groups? Doctors and airline pilots. Airline pilots and doctors are very similar. Okay, they're both well-trained, technical experts, leaders. But you guys know if you get on a plane, every time you walk on the plane, you look to your left in the cockpit, they're going over their checklists. They're going over the books. Now, they may have flown that same flight 5 times that day on that same airplane, but they must go over the checklist every single time. We know, I know from talking to the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, that they don't have a really hard time getting pilots to follow the checklist. They do not have a hard time getting them to comply with the checklist. Here we have two similar professionals, doctors and pilots. Pilots I feel comfortable with, doctors I don't. They're the same kinds of people. What's the difference between being a passenger and being a patient? Anyone have a thought?
Culture.
Culture? No? Is that what I'm looking for? It's a good answer.
Checklist.
The checklist? Sort of.
Ego.
Ego, sort of.
Interesting.
Level of control.
Level of control? Not what I'm looking for.
And it's, the outcome is much more unknown. There's less science.
Okay, no. All really good answers. The answer I was looking for, Alex, was motivation. She got it.
What's that?
When the pilot makes a mistake, he dies with you. You got it.
That's a good point.
Motivation.
You got skin in the game.
And skin in the game.
That's interesting.
So, very common audience for me to give this data and share this data with are people like you guys. You know, you're either professionals or highly trained, or you're on your way to being that. You're just like the doctors and you're just like the pilots. It's just a question of motivation. Are you motivated? Like Joe Gibbs, the Washington Redskins coach, who really wanted to win, so he was willing to come up with a new scouting mechanism. Like Russ Prince's clients, who are very focused on creating wealth. Like Dr. Richard Shannon, who was unwilling to accept the entrenched medical culture's results. Are you motivated by what they have done, which is to consider being successful in their business life or whatever life they came from as a matter of life and death? Or are you just happy accepting the conventional wisdom, the entrenched culture that you come from, and living your life, you know, in pursuit of something that's completely acceptable, which is called financial security, and pursuing something called the middle class life, which there's nothing in the world that's wrong with that? Or do you want to be a very wealthy person who's not looking for financial security so much, but is willing to change the way they behave in order to create something called financial independence? So I told you guys that I would ask at the end, did you think I have taught you how to create wealth? And what's your answer?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Now, I put this first bullet in here for students. So, and I would like those of us who have been around the block a little bit, at some point as we break up, to maybe pull a student aside and at least express your thoughts on this one thing. I have heard so often with the results of this book, and by the way, I get emails and letters and whatever, not letters anymore, I get emails from people, and it's so funny. They all say, oh, this book, you really, you really got me. You were talking to me. I understood it. But I don't know if they're talking about the fact that they're middle class and they never figured it out, or they're extremely wealthy. So, but I have gotten emails from billionaires, literally, strangers that I knew who they were when I got the email, but I didn't know them beforehand, who said, you got it. So a lot of times people hear this, and maybe some of the folks in this room who have a little more gray hair in their heads than the rest of us, will tell you what a lot of them have told me. Why didn't I have this book, or why didn't I have this data 20 years ago when it would have helped me? And so students have a unique opportunity because you're in the process of being taught how to think and how to act and how to operate, and you've just been handed the keys to the kingdom. And you have those 20 years that everyone else doesn't have. And so the saying of best time to plant an oak tree was 20 years ago. But the second best time to plant an oak tree is today. So do with this information what you will, the book. Thank you guys for inviting me out here to Connecticut. I really appreciate it.